I'm Pedro Sabrosa. I'm a visual effects supervisor at Framestore in London, and I've been there for about 20 years. So Guitar Hero Live is kind of an update on a game that had been very popular kind of between 2005 and 2010, and Activision, who published the game, wanted to create something fresh, something new to bring out onto the market. And so we were approached through Freestyle Games, who are going to be the game's designer on the project, who are owned by Activision, to kind of help them come up with the new approach for making the game. So I got involved in a process. We were kind of testing techniques to work out how we were going to film it. So a decision was made quite early on to do it with a real audience, a real band, and do it all live action, as opposed to having kind of stylized graphics as we had in the original game. So I kind of got involved early on as a visual effects supervisor to start testing techniques to, bring this footage to life. What kind of cameras we're going to use, what kind of motion control rigs we're going to use, how we're going to do that whole process, how we're going to generate a camera move that is representative of a guitarist's POV. So that was kind of another key change, is that the game was going to be the point of view from one of the band members on stage. That's correct, yeah. And the idea is that the footage is dynamic, so depending on how you're playing, the reaction of both the band and the audience change to match how well you're playing. So if you're not playing very well, they look at you very sternly, the audience starts to boo. If you start playing well, the crowd and the band start kind of being more positive towards you and more encouraging, and everyone goes crazy. But that can kind of fluctuate throughout the game as you're playing it. So there was quite a large kind of reference gathering where we kind of wanted to both go to festivals and gather loads of photos and reference on the internet for what the game should look like, what kind of details we're going to put into the game. So the whole kind of concept design process, and that also involved designing the bands, what they would look like, what the audience would look like, and because all the bands are going to be cast from musicians, and we're going to kind of manufacture these bands. So a whole kind of design process went into that, and that also kind of involved also creating a little narrative about each band. They will give it a name, a little bit of a backstory, and the way you introduce the band will kind of varied. But there was always a little story for each band, because in the game the idea would be that you'd kind of join a band maybe halfway in the middle of a set, and you'd play like 3 songs with that band, and those 3 songs would be kind of from one genre of music. So Framestore had been involved on the project, and it's right from an early phase for about four or 5 years maybe, right? When the kind of seed of the idea came from Activision through Freestyle Games to us. I got involved when we started doing some of the testing stage, which was probably about 2.5 years ago. And we started doing kind of a bigger budget test, having done some earlier tests which Framestore had done. I hadn't been involved in those ones with testing different camera techniques. I got involved when we started doing the kind of more high budget test that was going to be a proof of concept test to eventually show everyone what it was going to be like, and also be used as something to get the bands and the record companies on board to allow us to use their music. So I was kind of involved in the shooting process, in the compositing process of putting this together for this test. It was kind of like a 2D comp-only job. We weren't using any CG crowds or CG environments at that point. So I was overseeing a team putting that test. And then there was kind of a break period for a while where this test was being shown around to try and get the music on board and get all the licensing done. And then during that period, we were also kind of quoting, we kind of got some feedback, and we kind of saw what changes they wanted to make. So we had to kind of quote for the job. So we spent some time getting a bid together for the job, and then eventually when we started, I was on set for the whole project, supervising all the shoot, also part directing some of the crowd, extensions and elements that we had to shoot for the project, as well as doing some on-set compositing to see how all these elements were coming together. And then I went, once we finished shooting, we went into Framestore to then start putting everything together, and I was kind of overseeing a team of about 120 people kind of on and off for about 9 months. The main similarities are we did the project in our film department, so the crew coming on board are from a film background, their sensibilities, their kind of eye for detail are from that background. So they're bringing that film experience to the job, and we ran it as if it was a film job, through the film pipeline. Obviously, when you're trying to generate 5.5 hours of content, which is kind of equivalent to almost the number of shots you get on 3 large visual effects films, and you're doing it for a reduced budget and a reduced amount of time for generating that content, you have to kind of find economies and ways of both shooting it and posting the work to be able to generate that much content, but still to a high level. So while we were doing the post-production and all the testing, Freestyle were making the game, making the engine, and what we would do when we were kind of doing work in progress, whether it was a previs or whether it was kind of half-finished comp work, they would take our footage and then drop it into the game, into their game engine, and they would be able to test it out. So we'd kind of give them work in progress, and they could drop it into the game and see how it was all working. So the main task for Framestore on the job was generating huge crowds. So the majority of the crowd is all CG, generated in simmed in Golem, and then all the environments apart from the stage the band is on is a total CG environment. So that was kind of our main task, as well as a pretty kind of complex compositing challenge that we had, putting together all that footage and integrating the live action, which is basically the band, a few rows of crowd, a few additional passes of motion control with some additional crowd, and then the rest of it was all CG crowd and environments. I'd say one of the main challenges, the most rewarding challenge, was being involved right from the beginning to find the solution how we were going to make the game. Once we got into production, the main challenge was dealing with a project that needed so much content and all the consequences of that. You know, how do we get it rendered? How do we educate compositors who are generally used to comping shots of a few hundred frames and getting them to comp shots that are now, you know, anything from 6,000 to 12,000 frames long, and kind of find a process that allowed us to use a very experienced crew, but push a project with so much rendering and content that needed to be generated. So that was probably the consequences of having to generate so much content, you know, brought up challenges in all our departments and infrastructure to be able to get the project done. Yes, one of the things that we did that for us was relatively new was that we had to obviously light these environments, and on a stage you usually get the lighting design involves lots of lights triggering off, some of them in time with the music. Now, if you've got 5.5 hours of footage and you're trying to introduce some of those animating lights into your environment, to be able to animate lights in, you know, for that many frames would have been a massive job. So what we did is we took a lot of the lighting data out of the lighting desk that the lighting designer was using on the stage when we were filming the band, and we took all that channel information and fed it into our lighting rig in Maya, so then we could reuse those lights and use it as kind of a starting point to light our environments and our characters, and also put additional lights out into the environment to kind of, you know, further enhance the point of interest from the guitarist out onto the audience. And again, that was another one of the challenges that we had, because when you're at a gig, you're an audience member looking into the stage, so all the lighting design happens on the stage. That's where the visual interest is for at a gig or a festival. For the game, we're on stage looking out to the audience for a large portion, so we had to kind of find interesting ways of putting the visual interest out onto the crowd by adding additional lights and kind of props, and, you know, adding kind of flags and lights into people's hands to create you know, the environment looking out to the crowd and to the further background more interesting to look at. We'd never done a gaming project where we were creating the content for the game, so that was very much something new for us, and Framestore was quite keen to get into lots of new avenues, and gaming is definitely one of them, because there's such a kind of synergy and such a skill set similarity between the people who make games and kind of what we do now. So Framestore is very keen to try and use the skill set that we have to, you know, to start taking on more of those projects. I think for me personally, I really enjoyed, there was two clear stages. There was a shooting stage that I was heavily involved with, and that was a very tough, stressful time, because we were obviously trying to shoot so much. There were so many moving parts on set, so being involved in that process and then getting it to a point where everyone was happy, and this, you know, we became a happy family during the 6 months we were shooting. That was a very rewarding part of that process, getting that process to work efficiently and for us to be able to kind of get everything done on time. And then we went into post-production. For me personally, again, was having such a big crew, you know, working with us and kind of finding ways, the most efficient ways and creative ways to kind of get this game done in the time that we had. And it was, you know, that for me was, you know, ultimately and very rewarding that we managed to achieve what it is and get the game to a good quality and, you know, and use Framestore skills in a new avenue. It's great. It's definitely more immersive. It's more realistic, obviously, because we've got real people, real bands in the footage, and I think it works really well. I must admit that I'm absolutely terrible at the game. I'm not even though I'm a drummer, I'm absolutely, no matter how hard I try, I'm not the best one at it. But it is great, and people love it, and it's also very much a communal experience, because our footage that we've created is something to kind of be enjoyed by generally the people who are around the gamer, because the game is very fixated on kind of making sure he hits his notes, and everyone else is kind of, they're the ones ultimately watching our work. So that's kind of how I see the new game. I mean, this is my first time to FMX, and it's been amazing. I mean, to be able to come here and share, you know, get everyone else's experience, your peers' experience, and share your experiences of what you're doing, because everyone's doing so much. There's so much demand for content at the moment, and people are doing it for so many different avenues, and it's very interesting to see, you know, how people are creating content for different types of platforms. So seeing that and kind of, you know, learning new techniques and new avenues that, you know, maybe I hadn't explored myself has been an amazing experience, and I'm really enjoying going to all the talks and seeing all the new things that are out there, because it's kind of really an explosion of you know, of content creation at the moment in loads of different platforms, and seeing that all in one place has been amazing.